Ben Smith is going to be on with us later in this hour. He's the author of a new book about the rise and fall of digital media startups over the last 2.5 decades. Vice yesterday filed for bankruptcy after once having a valuation of $5.7 billion. And one of the great stories of rising from the ashes and the dumpster opposite mainstream media to become a profitable, successful, crazy successful thing is Barstool Sports. At least in part because they have the image of being counterculture, of being rebellious, of being free in ways that aren't exactly positive often. And they get into a lot of trouble, but have a fan base that enjoys that trouble and, in the age of the lament of cancel culture, enjoys that Barstool doesn't have the rules that others have. But yesterday, Barstool had to fire someone, a popular employee, because that employee made the egregious mistake of reading rap lyrics as a white person using the N-word. And David Portnoy, who runs Barstool, founded Barstool, and has also done that. Barstool has a zero tolerance policy because Portnoy has done that same thing, used the N-word again and again. He disagreed with the firing of the popular employee, Mintz. I think it's Kevin Mintz.
Ben
Mintz. That's a fine
Close.
for me. Is that $5 or $2 for me? What's the fine?
You called Dave Portnoy David, so there's that too.
Okay, well,
Didn't know you knew him like that.
but wait a minute. Is that a fine? Put it on the poll, please.
That's not a fine. The Kevin thing is definitely.
Thought you would have called him
definitely.
David at least.
Yes, David.
I think we have to charge him double because the fine bucket's empty because it was all stolen. So we need to get
that's
some
true.
money put back in there.
Did Stugotz steal the money from the fine bucket?
Probably.
No,
Give
he
her
doesn't
Mike
need
Jones.
it. He expensed the expenses to the New York trip, so he doesn't need the money.
Mike Jones is what you went with?
Wow.
He's the only one that's not around anymore.
Bob too.
Bob, that
Yep,
was a
Bob's
hot,
on my
hot-
list.
yeah.
Bob is canon. Mike Jones is in 2 minutes.
Go sit in the penalty box, Chris Cody, for the Mike Jones reference. Look at him looking around. What happened?
He just asked me
referenced
what
Mike-
happened.
You referenced Mike Jones. Nobody knows who you're talking about. Go sit in the penalty box. Get out of here.
I get what you got there.
And so here's the story, though. Barstool, evidently, is losing a lot of fans, or at least vocal fans are saying they're leaving, because they can't believe that Barstool has gone so corporate while owned by Penn Gaming that Dave Portnoy, or David as I like to call him, that Dave Portnoy wouldn't have the power to keep an employee. Dave Portnoy called one of those emergency press conferences of his and said that he vehemently disagreed with the firing, but he couldn't control the firing. And now their fans are disappointed. Wait a minute, what kind of pirate ship or rebels are you if you're run by the corporation? And it made me wonder around here, because we are not owned by anybody. One of the reasons we made the decision we did is so that we would not be owned by anybody and would have absolute freedom. But what would happen if someone around here made an egregious mistake and I didn't want to fire them because I never want to have to fire anybody?
And let's be clear that if you watch this video, I'm not black, I'm not the aggrieved party here, but if you watch the video, he turns white as a ghost immediately upon saying
he was
it.
already white as a ghost.
Yeah, but all right.
He works for Barstool.
Fair enough, but it did appear to be a Ron Burgundy teleprompter moment. He was reading rap lyrics. He said the N-word that popped up as a lyric, and he immediately tried to eject on the whole thing. But there is important context, as you were saying. They have a zero tolerance policy in place. Penn does, in large part, due to Dave Portnoy's previous N-word controversy, in which it wasn't necessarily a Ron Burgundy moment. He was actually just saying these things, and it wasn't actually quote unquote a mistake.
I think that you're missing one part of this equation, which is you saying how free you are and that you own this, so therefore you can decide what happens when DraftKings picks up the phone and they're the one who funds your flights of fancy, and they say, hey, we are not accepting this talk or behavior.
One of the reasons I want to talk about this is because I found all of that happening to be interesting, because part of Barstool's popularity, baked into it, is the undercurrent of we don't have to live by anyone else's rules. And their fans expect them. Part of their popularity is they will go into some of these places in the age of cancel culture. Sure, I mean, distract me during sensitive subject matter. That's a great idea. Just walk across the studio and sure, when we're talking about the N-word, I think that's something that you should be doing because you did what there? What did you get out of here? Get out of here. Just go.
Minutes.
Just get out of here.
Yeah.
Go sit in the
Just
penalty
bad
box.
timing.
Like,
I was.
That might be a major.
get out of here. Out.
Well, you shouldn't take that tone with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bad tone.
Oh, DraftKings.
No, because he wants to get in here. He wants to do this
Wants to
thing.
do a
I'm
visual
so
gag instead of help you
I'm
out.
so tired though. Also, of everyone wants to keep talking after being sent to the penalty box. Like I want to get back to doing the show when I'm talking about sensitive subject matter and not have people behaving the way that they always behave.
Let me also try to help you out here by providing a little bit more information. Portnoy, in his emergency press conference in which he was wearing a Cesta Cyclones practice jersey, we're not thrilled with that look.
Oh, God.
We're not at all thrilled with that
Where
look.
did he
Horse
get
finger.
that?
Well, he did go to Magic City Highlight earlier this week. I saw people were sending me video of him out there, and I saw the Chris Cody sign on the front. I was laughing. I guess Highlight gave him a swag bag, and in that swag bag for this emergency press conference, he is wearing a Cesta Cyclones jersey.
I
He's
assumed
wearing.
he was just wearing it.
He was-
You think he actually put it on for the press conference? Interesting.
No, there is no way he decided to wear a jersey that is a team owned by the Le Batard Show. It's impossible.
He just happened to be wearing it.
Yeah.
When he did that's the essence of an emergency press conference. What interests me more about the story is I'm very concerned about people thinking that Barstool could still be Barstool after they sold. It's not Barstool anymore.
Yeah. Portnoy himself said, I'm worried that this could be a death blow for Barstool. And then he chose very curious words. This goes against everything that we stand for. It's a little odd choice of words when you consider the actual controversy that we're talking about. But this is Mincy paying for the sins of Dave Portnoy.
No, this is Mincy and Portnoy paying for the sins of cashing out. That's all that happened here.
They have a zero tolerance policy in place. I believe that to be legitimate, and it's a zero tolerance policy in place because Portnoy has survived his own controversies with that word.
They probably would have just had this stance on the N-word, right? I mean, it's hard to say that that's old. Like,
Barstool did not. I mean,
don't most companies have a no tolerance policy?
Not
Not
Barstool.
Barstool.
Not Barstool. At least, like the founder of the place has gotten away with it repeatedly.
Again, I will say to you that I believe that part of the popularity of what is allowed to exist there outside of the mainstream media is with the fan base, with the Bud Light shooters who say we're immune to cancel culture, and his particular popularity is because he's so brazen that he doesn't care. To see him neutered by Penn Gaming saying
In a Cyclones jersey.
to him, you can't cost us our license. This is something that could cost us our license, showed me, and not that I needed to see it again, that corporations right now seeing Bud Light sales tank are terrified of anything they get near. And this kind of thing is going to be terrifying for every single corporation. So what are your thoughts, though, Dave? Because I would object to DraftKings. I don't know. You got to give me the particulars of what the circumstances would be that somebody around here would be fired, but that's not a fight I would be willing to lose in most circumstances with DraftKings or anyone else. DraftKings does not own us. DraftKings sponsors us. DraftKings rents us.
But if they said that you're in violation of your rental agreement and the money that they give you is at stake, would that change your opinion?
It depends on whether I was willing to fight for whatever it is that the cause was. I can't answer that question in the hypothetical. I have to understand what the employee has done.
Well,
Let's
I mean-
assume the employee did exactly what Ben Mintz did.
Right. Like that's a case study, which is I think most people would agree watching the video and seeing the apology, this was a mistake. That's important. in all
It's not
this.
about, but it's not about Ben Mintz, really. It's about Penn saying he's got to go or the money's gone. One of the two. So that's if you're trying to do an analogy, think of someone here, not
And
me.
Penn
not
could say the
Roy.
money's gone because they already bought Barstool.
Right.
They own it. DraftKings could
Right.
say the money's gone.
Right.
Do this or the money's gone.
I'd have to know whether or not they actually can do that contractually. Because
Yes, they can.
They could. As someone that's been in the rooms when DraftKings takes issue with something or has a difference of opinion, like there's a meeting of minds and we talk things out. Thankfully, in the history of our partnership, there haven't been many hills to die on when it comes to these kind of things, and we've also never stepped into this. And Barstool tends to step into this a lot. And yes, while a legitimate rationalization from Penn to Portnoy and the messaging to the audience is we could lose our license for this, I don't necessarily think there's a gaming inspector that's going to be like, no more online poker. Mincy said the N-word by accident.
I do. That's the idea that like, no. Racism? No, we'll never have that. We as a multi-billion-dollar American corporation have never in our history experienced anything like this. This guy's got to go. It's
We are the
ridiculous.
gaming board. We here have morals.
It's kind of ridiculous. But Dan, the question stands. What David asked you, if that happened and DraftKings said, get rid of him/her or the money's gone.
I am inclined to treat all of this as we are partners. You do not own this. Period.
Horse hockey.
You say that, but we left
do.
ESPN. You say that, and it cost me millions of dollars. You say that, but
And
you haven't had to make
given
this
that
particular
experience-
principled stand.
But it was really nice how principled your stance was. It
it
really
cost.
was.
It cost me.
We are in new studios
listen,
right now.
Listen, it cost me millions of dollars.
This is awkward.
And so you're going to do another thing that'll cost you more millions? You're going to have another principal. You're going to love Chris so
depends.
much that you're going to cost more millions.
Chris got to be the guy.
It depends.
I'm just the kid.
Apologize, Chris.
I'm the kid here, and the parents were fighting.
Shrapnel.
we have a licensing agreement. Thankfully, our situation is totally different than being owned and operated
No,
by
but
Penn Gaming.
his thing is,
I'm saying I'm accepting that it's a licensing agreement and there are provisions in the contract.
Meanwhile,
where
DraftKings
there's
isn't our
termination.
only partner. We have several partners that if we were to step into this, it's not just DraftKings that we'd have to discuss these things with.
It scares me because what you're talking about there would cost me audience because of the expectation that I will protect our employees over a mistake, and that mistake is hard to protect. Listen to the laughter over here of the guy who walked up and tried to distract me during the subject matter.
that's why we don't go live anymore. So I watched the Netflix special, John Mulaney, or as Dan likes to call him, James Mulvaney, and it was remarkable because he was incredibly honest about some stuff that I would deem pretty personally embarrassing. I'm sure-
Addiction,
Yeah.
the embarrassment of being an addict since 14 or 13 years old.
Yep. And but the way he described his intervention was just I was in tears. I was laughing at his pain, but just the idea of him rebelling against the idea that these people are going to tell me that I have a problem.
A sober Fred Armisen not cracking jokes.
That's what he said. The hardest part was for them was that they're all comedians, but they have to do this and they're not allowed to do any bits. They told each other beforehand, we're not going to do any bits because if we do, then it's going to lessen the venom of what this thing is supposed to be. He showed up an hour and a half late because he went to go buy some Coke before he went to the intervention.
And get a haircut at SNL.
He didn't know the intervention was coming,
No,
did he? So
no.
he didn't know it was an hour and a half before
Well,
the intervention.
Had
just-
he known, he would have been forever late.
Right.
Yeah. He said, and the other thing he said, if they had wanted me to get there on time, they should have just said, we have Coke. And then I would have been there punctually.
Pete Davidson among those who reached out to him. I didn't love the special. You're commending him for it was okay. It was.
I really liked it.
I liked it a lot.
Most people are going to applaud him and this, but when you celebrate him for uncommon honesty around the shame of addiction, I was also craving, and this is his right. Hey, what happened to your reputation tanking because Olivia Munn and you ended up being together and it also wrecked your marriage. You stayed away from that one while being uncommonly honest, telling the intervention stories that I've heard you tell before, because this is not, he was sharpening that material around the country. So that's not the first time I heard him.
That's every comic, though. Every special is like that.
He did kind of touch on that when he was sharing a story about pawning a Rolex because he was trying to steal his own money because he had a financial advisor and a doctor kind of overseeing his transactions. And he told this really embarrassing story about how he pawned off a Rolex several hours after.
5 minutes.
Yeah,
5 minutes. He
yeah,
said
yeah.
12,000 he
Yeah,
bought it for and sold it for 6,000.
I'll be down.
Yeah.
I'll be down there. In 3 minutes, you rush down 7th Avenue
Yeah.
to get to this.
I hate that we're laughing about this.
But the
that's-
punchline of the joke, the punchline of that whole bit is, and those are the stories that I'm willing to tell you. And it's kind of a tip of the hat to, I'm not willing to tell you what happened with the dissolution of my marriage and what happened with Olivia, because I do believe Olivia wasn't, I seen word out there that Olivia was part of the intervention.
Well, Mike, the other thing is he does touch graze again on it earlier. He says, how do you mess up a career and a marriage? And like he said that, but he didn't get into any detail.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of meat on the bone, and he can always address that in a future special. All in all, it was very honest and it was very funny, and it's kind of everything that I had hoped for in this specific special. His return to stand-up, addressing what happened in his personal life.
That also might be out of respect to his now ex-wife, right? Like who was the butt of so many jokes in his initial stand-up. Like their relationship was what he did, and now he's in this position where it's like, I'll poke fun at myself and my addiction and how I hurt myself, not the people I hurt in the response. But I thought the way that he crafted all of it was really sort of a genius balancing act of, I'm giving you enough to where you now view me entirely differently than you did walking into this special, but also I'm not necessarily exposing anybody else's issues.
That's an excellent point by Jeremy. After all he's put, just saying the public eye, not even to mention the hell that might be her private life, there might have been a conversation. I am not your bit. Like, do not make this a bit.
Everything said there by you guys is totally fair, but his reputation hit isn't because of the drugs. It's not because of the addiction. He and Olivia Munn's reputation hit are because of what happened in the marriage. But you are right. He is entitled to choose whatever material he chooses to profit off in comedy. And David, when you say, I feel uncomfortable laughing about this, he's a comedian. He did a special so that we could laugh about it.
I don't agree with the difference we're making between addiction and affairs and marriage. So maybe this is just me with experience or me coming out of the sports world. But I don't think that getting people to an intervention by saying we have drugs, I don't find that compelling or funny or interesting. Having someone criticize someone because of affairs when that's all I've been surrounded by my entire life. And it's not something that to me goes to the character of the person. It's not an addiction. It is not something that stops you from doing your job. I never understood why Steve Phillips, which is a callback, a crazy name, had to lose his job as GM of the Mets because he cheated on his wife. The fact that they had an affair and that they're married, they're not married, they have kids. We have such an interest in our society about this. It's so oversized and out of proportion that I would like to focus on the drug side, which is a far bigger problem in a marriage, in a relationship, being a parent, being an employer, being an employee. That crushes a lot more lives than when you decide that you're ready to not be married or to fool around with
you should
someone else.
watch the special, because that's exactly Mulaney's approach
It's all about
to it.
it's all about the drugs.
Yeah.
And so why you're saying, I thought, I may have misheard you because I was distracted by Amin. I thought what you were saying is that you were thinking that it was the affair that caused all the issues, not the drugs.
I am saying that where his reputation was harmed the most and where Olivia Munn took a reputation hit, it was not the drugs. It was
Dan.
I mean, it was the home wrecking. Olivia
Not Olivia Munn. I'm talking about Mulaney's.
That he
hit?
left his family and his wife. And I'm telling you, that it was not the drugs. The idea. Now, I find it shocking, too. I don't know what I'm doing here, that someone who looks like that would be addicted to cocaine from the age of 13 or 14 years old. Like, that was not something. His demeanor, his delivery, all of that stuff. For some reason, I didn't think cocaine addiction there because of the packaging.
That's part of his entire bit. So he has a bit where he in one of his earliest stand-ups where he says that he used to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, which is probably surprising because I look like someone who was sitting in a closet for 28 years, eating saltines, and then walked out and started speaking to you. Like that's his whole thing. And I actually think, like, you're right. The relationship was part of the sort of reputational issues that he had, and obviously Olivia Munn ended up getting the brunt of that. But part of it was really because he did have this sort of pristine look, as his stand-up was about, I am past drug abuse, like talking about drug abuse as a past thing, while we're finding out he was really on a lot of drugs as he's telling us those jokes.
And I think the most genius aspects of Mulaney's special is when he uses that to his advantage. And he highlights, how did you not know I was on drugs? Here is an old interview that I gave to GQ. This person is on so many drugs. How did you not see this?
Him reading it verbatim and the answers to some of the questions. And it's like, how did the writer must have known and just said, the hell with it. We're putting it out there.
He closed his special basically reading a GQ interview right before that intervention that was totally nonsensical and ridiculous and unhinged, and it shouldn't have been printed because it made no sense what he was doing. Because
it starts off with, I just walked by a haunted house. Like, it's crazy. Honestly, I'm a little disappointed to hear that you didn't like it all that much, because I think it's right up there in the pantheon of recent comedy specials, and it might be my favorite Mulaney special.
No, I am not. I'm saying I did not love it. I am saying that I didn't spend a lot of time laughing out loud at what it is that he was doing. Of course, he's a craftsman. Of course, the skill of stand-up is amazing, indisputably. And it speaks to the power, not that Donald Trump didn't already do this, of a white man in a suit, that I am jarred by that kind of drug use.
That's also his joke.
But Roy, like, he uses that to his advantage. Like, that is the large punchline of this all. It's like white privilege.
And yet you're the one who
his
said
initial specials. Like, it was the punchline of his initial specials.
I just can't imagine, Dan, what you're doing here, because you said the GQ article, and I'm coming from a place of ignorance on this, so I'm not saying I know it all. Didn't see the special.
You really have to.
Didn't read the GQ article.
You have to.
But the GQ article was before the special. Mm-hmm. And you read that saying, how could they even print that? And then you said, I can't even imagine someone who looks like him was on drugs. Which one is it?
No. It's not on drugs. It's I'm copping to the packaging, making it so that I didn't have him doing drugs from 13 years old. That he tricked me with some of the packaging as a stand-up comic. There's not a stand-up comic who looks like that. Period.
And you've never been tricked before by someone doing drugs, or by someone having affairs, or by someone doing all these things?
Sure. What's your point?
I'm saying that why is it matter what he looks like? Why is that such a focus?
I'm just telling you that in his particular case, the drug use paired against how it is that he was packaging himself. The optics were something that made me not imagine that he had that kind of addiction from his early teens.
This is where David not watching much of Mulaney's work hurts him in this, because it is irrefutably part of the gambit when you go see John Mulaney, his presentation. And when you hold that in stark contrast to what his personal life is, it actually makes a great creative sandbox for this special.
And that he's wife guy. So, like, going into this, that was also part of it, and part of why, Dan, I imagine your response was like, I needed to hear more about this part of the reputational hit, because so much of his stand-up was almost the sort of Jerry Seinfeld observational comedy, and here's my relationship with my wife and our dog. And so for him to now have to basically find his way to say, no, I'm not past the drug abuse. In fact, I was doing all of these drugs all of this time, and it's the reason my entire life and my relationship fell apart, but I'm going to make you laugh over it. I thought the balance in that was just sensational.
You loved it, right? I mean,
I thought it was incredible. I enjoyed it. And to kind of highlight what everyone's saying about what kind of comedian he is, he starts off by noticing there's a 10-year-old in the audience.
I thought that was a plant.
Maybe it was.
It was a plant. So this is the part that's cool. He did that crowd work with that exact kid at a random, as he was crafting the stand-up, and he was doing these club shows. And that kid was there, and he started implementing that crowd work with young kids in whatever audience he was in, and then flew that kid out from the original crowd work to be at the
Does it
special.
bother you when that happens?
No, that's
The
pretty.
plants?
That's no, not when it's done like that. That's pretty cool.
How else are plants done?
Just say, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you bring your kid? And then that's kind of lazy. But if it came out of somewhere organic and said, I like that content, I want to recreate it, because that's really what stand-up is recreating the same routine over and over. That's when Dan said, well, he's done this before. I'm like, well, Dan, that's every televised special. They've all done it before.
Well, you say that, but I do remember the documentary Comedian that I've recommended several times on this show, and Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld are simply marveling because they sculpt every word, knowing where the laughs are. Unfortunately, the guy they were marveling at, Bill Cosby. Ben Smith is with us now. He's the author of the new book on the rise and fall of digital media startups. The name of the book, Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. He's the former media columnist for the New York Times, founder and former editor-in-chief of the late BuzzFeed News, and founder and editor-in-chief of Semafor. Thank you for joining us. Ben, let's start with what happened here with Vice. I mean, you are fascinated by what happened with Vice. They made so much good content. They were a really rebellious, fun company. I can't believe they've gone from a $5.7 billion valuation to bankruptcy.
Yeah, like you said, Dan, it was the kind of news. At one point, I was watching Vice News to get my news because I felt like they represented actual journalism in a world where everything else seemed to be about ratings and whatnot. And I was reading the New York Times piece, Ben, and they said the company had been trying for years to turn a profit and it consistently failed to do so, losing money and repeatedly laying off employees. Was there ever a path to profitability for this type of journalism?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I mean, yeah, it is crazy that Vice, in particular, the highest valued, of all those companies, and a brand that really means something, never figured out a way to become profitable. And I mean, that HBO show, that news show that I watched too and thought was great. I mean, it was basically what had happened is that they had given up on making money on the internet and turned themselves into an old-fashioned television company that was producing a show and getting paid, cost plus a percentage by HBO to make the show. And when HBO killed the show, that was pretty much the end for them. And they've been, kind of flailing around trying to fix it for a year, but there isn't really a path for them.
What else happened, or is that it?
I mean, that is the short story. The long story is that these companies, Vice and BuzzFeed, maybe probably the two biggest of them, built these huge brands and reached, a whole generation of people on the backs of the internet, particularly the backs of these social networks, Facebook and Twitter. And we thought that we'd be able to build businesses on them. And for, and the platforms did not really want that to happen. And then consumers got sick of getting their news on those platforms anyway. And so I think, ultimately there's a lot of kind of business mistakes along the way, but the biggest picture was just that social media didn't turn out to be a hospitable place to build a business.
How much did the scandals that the co-founder Shane Smith found himself in play into its demise?
I mean, I think that was part of the charm, right? For a long time, Shane, getting photographed with handfuls of cash that was the brand. I think that was marketing. I don't think those were scandals. You guys should do that more.
Well, no, I mean, amidst the Me Too movement, he was forced to step down as CEO, and also
Right.
HBO's decision.
Decidedly less charming, Ben.
Yeah,
Less charming scandals of
he was a
late
part of that
Vice.
HBO show. He was front facing on that HBO show.
Yeah.
And when he stepped into that stuff, he ceased being on that HBO show, and it played into that show being canceled and the downward spiral.
Yeah, I guess that is true. And part of their brand was sort of this more kind of, sexist, among other things, early internet. But they survived his departure for a while. And I do think, yeah, and maybe, the thing was they were totally reliant on HBO and on HBO's decision to renew, like any other television show and any other production company. And ultimately, that's a pretty tough business.
I was focused on the capitalization of the companies, actually, because we're talking about that people changed how they want to get their news and whether it's aggregated or original content. But isn't it true with these companies that what makes them survive and get past the issues that happen in this new digital era is their level of capitalization, and how much of an issue was that?
These companies raised so much money at such crazy valuations. I mean, in retrospect, and I was there when BuzzFeed turned down a $650 million offer from Disney. I, wrote about it in the book, and it's like, in retrospect, one of the dumbest things any media company's ever done. But all these numbers were going up and to the right, and venture capital investors, big media companies, put in hundreds of millions of dollars. Which Vice and BuzzFeed were not, ran on for a while, but weren't able to get to profitability, and ultimately had a kind of capitalization that required them to take huge risks to get to a huge valuation to justify it.
Your book chronicles, and again, the name of the book is Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the Billion-Dollar Race to Go Viral. The rise and fall of Gawker, BuzzFeed, as we mentioned. You helped turn that into a legitimate Pulitzer Prize-winning news organization. Those two companies in particular, what does that say about the promise and delusion of new media titans? Gawker Media, wrecked somehow by Hulk Hogan, and BuzzFeed.
Well, not somehow. We know how.
Yeah.
It's just Hulk Hogan. It's the absurdity of Hulk Hogan wrecking something like Gawker Media.
Peter Thiel's money.
Yeah, in some ways, Gawker in particular, represented early on this particular promise of the internet, which was, that it would kind of rip the mask off of the sort of stodgy old media, that you would hear the way journalists really talk to each other, see what was happening behind the scenes. And at times that was really positive. There were elements of it that you were like, yeah, this is real. This is not the sort of, some of it, like Jezebel, the women's blog, was launched with a $10,000 bounty for an unretouched photograph, and somebody did steal a photo from Redbook of Faith Hill where she still had freckles and smile lines, and put it on the internet, and it was did sort of, in a small way, push the media to be closer to reality, but it also, that same tendency, they just felt like you should expose everything. And they published sex tapes, with some regularity. And Peter Thiel did fund this conspiracy against them, basically, to destroy them. But, ultimately it was this decision to publish a series of sex tapes. They linked to the Aaron Andrews stuff, which was really particularly disgusting. And, but then and I think a jury by 2015 is just like, what are you doing? That's so far outside the norms, and many people have on their own phones all sorts of intimate stuff they would not want leaked and published on blogs.
What do you make of the latest Barstool news and Barstool in general?
One of the things, one of the big media investor called me after the book came out and said, all your book says is some companies sold at the right time and others didn't. Mm-hmm. Barstool obviously did get out, at some level on top. I think the big story of a lot of these companies, and I think what you guys are doing as part of it, is that there's been a shift toward an audience that wants to hear from individuals over institutions. I think the challenge for Barstool is it Dave, or is it a company called Barstool, or is it, and I think that's it's a big question.
How about the latest controversy, though, where Portnoy is saying he disagrees with Penn's decision to fire a popular employee who used the N-word while reading rap lyrics?
You sell your company, and that's what, and that is, I would say two things. You sell your company to a big corporation, and that is that's obviously the consequence. But it's also the challenge of buying a brand that is so centered on one guy and his taste. I think, but in the biggest picture, though, I think these corporate media owners, and maybe everybody, is sick of the kind of Wild West of the social media era. On a much bigger level, Tucker Carlson getting fired, Don Lemon getting fired, are part of that same impulse by big corporate media owners just to reel people in.
The success, first of all, building a place around one guy seems like a terrible idea. Why would anyone do that?
I know. Present company totally excluded here.
The interesting thing about the ones that seem to be succeeding are mostly, I guess you would call conservative / right leaning. Is there any particular reason for that, do you believe?
Oh, I don't know if that's true. I think there's Ezra Klein is a huge podcaster. I think there's a whole liberal ecosystem too on audio, on that's building a whole internet. But to some sense, the New York Times is a center-left institution, and so if you're going to go around building alternatives, probably more of them are going to be on the right.
I want to know what's next. Who's out there? I want the added value of tell me the next place where I should be going to get my news, where I can invest or be part of some sort of funding where we're going to get out on top, but get in at the bottom.
Well, funny you should ask. It's called semafor.com. Yeah. No, I mean, that's obviously more broadly. I mean, I do think that the successful business, obviously, like the bet I'm actually making is, and in some ways what is trying to figure out how you give, particularly in my world, kind of breaking news reporters, the kinds of reporters who are out there reporting breaking stories, the direct connection to an audience that you get with this new media where you're talking directly to your audience in plain English, where they know what the facts are, they know what your opinions are, they know the difference, but then also the support of a newsroom, which I think a lot of reporters really want, and colleagues and legal support and a brand and publishing infrastructure. And like, how do you, and this is particularly, political reporters, Wall Street reporters, people who are out there breaking news every day, sports reporters, like, how do you get the best of both worlds there? And that's what we're trying to do.
So you're definitely not going to do sex tapes, but you're going to have to do something to bring attention to what you're doing. Are you going to try with just quality, or do you have something in mind, a marketing situation or something where you're going to build your audience to build your valuation?
I mean, in news, the sort of core thing you need is scoops. And we break a lot of news. We broke the Microsoft investment in ChatGPT. And just we're aggressively trying to break stories all the time, and that's always inevitably part of it. And then when people come back, you have to be giving them something that, to me, like answers the question, like that fixes what everybody hates about the news right now, which is they feel totally overwhelmed and they aren't sure what to trust. And so we're trying to be very totally kind of human and transparent in the way we do the journalism, and then we're also trying to sort through lots of different sources and bring you a bunch of different views on the same story, so you don't have to go Google 15 different things and triangulate what's going on.
Quickly, what happens next with Tucker Carlson?
I think he'll have there'll be a bidding war from sort of right-wing conglomerates, outlets, places like Rumble, that for whom he would be totally transformative. I mean, you could imagine Twitter, giving him a sort of subscription thing on Twitter to kickstart a Twitter program. I mean, I think he'll probably keep doing the same thing, make more money, and have less influence than he did on Fox.
Ben, thank you for being on with us. We appreciate the expertise, sir.
Thanks for having me. I'm a fan.
David, also, thank you for spending this much time with us this week, even though you've taken quite the beating.
It's time to go home.
Well, no, spend the next 2 hours in the penalty box.
What? No!
Just 2 hours.
Seriously, go.
And starting now.